today's episode, we are going to be talking about people-pleasing, specifically as it relates to dominant-submissive relationships. And we're going to take some time to really go into how people-pleasing played into your role, or in your life, really, before we were dominant-submissive, and some of the ways that it's had to work its way out of you. Right before we started, I asked you, what do you think is the opposite of people-pleasing? And you said what?
Authentic desire to please. So, like, the key word is authenticity.
Mm-hmm. And that was the same, like, authenticity was the same word I had in my mind as well when thinking about what is people-pleasing not. And that really gets at an important point to the whole idea of people-pleasing. Before we dive into it, is there is at some level, the difference between giving and people-pleasing is there's something inauthentic about it, right? There's something not real.
Right.
So, what is people-pleasing to you?
For me, it meant that I was giving myself to others to either make them happy, to make them feel good, to give them what they wanted from me. And what I didn't realize for a lot of my life was that it was giving to someone else without even considering myself.
Considering yourself.
Considering my own desire in what I was doing, how I was giving of myself, and the fact that I would put someone else's feelings before my own, before anything about myself. And it's an unconscious pattern, an unconscious behavior.
Some people who message us or write to us about submission will say with a lot of pride that they're a people pleaser, like something that they're proud of. Would you say that it felt like something you were proud of?
Once I recognized what people pleasing, the putting others before myself, actually felt like, once I connected to my own experience of it, it felt gross. It felt like I didn't have any self-worth. Like I cared so much more about someone else than I cared about myself.
But before that, when you were living in that way, when you were just giving and giving and giving of yourself,
Mm-hmm.
would you say that you felt differently about that giving?
Well, when I was living out this pattern that had been there like my whole life, like this goes back to childhood and witnessing probably how many adults, but especially my mother, would give of herself. This also involves how my impression of, I'm going to label this as religion, gave the impression, I guess, of self-sacrifice, of hearing some of those words, give unto others, all of that language that I was a big part of my upbringing. I mean, private school, going to church every Sunday, going to Sunday school, I absorbed a lot of that. And so I associated giving of myself to others as good. And what I have now recognized is not all of that giving of myself to others was actually out of my own desire to give to others. Mm-hmm. So many times it just was following a rule, if you will, versus following my own desire.
Yeah. And it's that indiscriminate giving without any consideration of what you need where it becomes people pleasing.
Right.
And giving is a beautiful thing.
Yes.
And it can be a very fulfilling, rewarding, like absolutely positive experience to give of yourself.
Yes, absolutely. There's so much there that I could elaborate on.
Well, the point that I want to make here is that people pleasing as a pattern that can be broken out of doesn't mean shifting to not giving of yourself.
Not at all.
It means shifting to giving from a place of fullness rather than giving from a place of obligation.
Right. And so, this journey into submission has been a beautiful unraveling of the people pleasing for me. Because I had authentic desire to give to you. Like, some people are familiar with the 5 love languages, and I took that test, and it was like my number 2 love language was acts of service. And it's true. I do love giving to others. Like, I genuinely, without expectation in return. And so when we added this dynamic to our marriage, like that authentic desire to please you was already there. Mm-hmm. And so I got to live in even more of that focus. What I started to recognize in that process was when that resentment started to build in me. And that was eye-opening for me. I was like, why? Like, what is going on here that I'm starting to resent a lot of things that felt good to me? Mm-hmm. Like I thought felt good to me in this person that I love and desire to give my devotion to and give of myself to. And it was just like this contradiction in my body, and I was like, whoa, what is going on here? And that's when I started to realize that in some ways, not all, that I was acting out of the desire to please you without even recognizing that I was crossing over my own need and saying no to myself in certain ways.
And that's a really big differentiation between people pleasing and authentic. Like, authentic giving is, are you saying yes to yourself or are you saying no to yourself?
Exactly. And once I started approaching it in that way and really just sitting with, am I saying yes to you because I need to make you feel okay? Or am I afraid to tell you no? And this like also played out in all of the other relationships in my life.
Right.
And it gave me, it was like I put on a pair of glasses that I hadn't been wearing, and it was like, whoa, it felt overwhelming. The amount of myself that I gave away. Yeah, and it overwhelming and sad. And
when you realized it?
When I realized it, yes. And because of all of the different belief systems that felt like they were underneath it. And it was like, whoa, what am I doing to myself? Like that feeling of living inauthentically just like was a gut punch.
Another reason that I know you have identified for yourself, and that we've heard from plenty of other people too, that people will go into and live in this people-pleasing pattern, is that they're trying to get some kind of a need met by doing so.
Yeah.
What needs would you say you were trying to get met unconsciously?
To feel loved. I was associating with how I gave of myself to get loved in return.
So looking back at that, what was the pattern you were trying to get to play out? I give of myself, and then what were you hoping?
You love me more for what I'm doing.
And that's where it becomes actually way less about giving in a people-pleasing pattern. It, on its face, at the front, it's about what you're giving and what you're doing and like how selfless you can be and how kind you can be. But underneath it, it's being done to get something.
Right. And also validating my own self-worth. Because I definitely grew up with an environment that perpetuated that self-sacrifice, and for whatever reason I attached that to my self-worth and how much I gave of myself. Like I watched a lot of that in my what felt like a sheltered early life experience, that I watched how adults gave of themselves and how involved they were in church and school and all of those ways. And it was this theme of like, others need your time, your money, everything about you more than you need it yourself. That's how I saw it and absorbed it.
Yeah. And in all of those attempts to get the reciprocal, like, I'm giving my love to you, and I'm hoping, or maybe even covertly expecting, that you're going to give back to me in the same way. Like, I'm going to meet your needs, and then someone's going to meet mine, right?
Right. And it was this almost like, am I good enough now?
Mm-hmm.
Am I good enough to get into heaven? Am I giving of myself enough? Am I doing
lovable?
It right?
Am I lovable?
Yep.
So, that when that pattern keeps playing out like that, and it doesn't work, because that self-worth, the gas tank of your energy in your life, keeps getting given away and given away and given away. What I saw you doing, and what I see a lot of people do, is saying to themselves, again on a subconscious level, most people aren't aware that they're doing this, and I'm hoping that this podcast helps some people see what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
But what I watched you do is tell yourself, this isn't working, I'm going to do more of it, then maybe it'll work.
Absolutely. That's the way the ego tries to protect you and keep you in that perpetual pattern.
Yep. And so continuing to even like doubling down on giving more time, more money, more energy, and hoping that at some point it's going to start feeling good.
Right. So what I remember opened my eyes to this was, I don't know how many years ago now. We were at a point in our lives where it was newer that we got to spend a lot of our days together. And it felt fun. It felt amazing. And I remember kind of, just waking up every day and it was like, all right, sir, what are we going to do today? How are we going to spend our time? Like just waiting for you to just guide us, right? Like I'm following, you lead.
Mm-hmm.
Felt good. In my own personal development, my own journey inward, I was faced with a point where all of a sudden, constantly asking you to dictate how my time looked, like I said before, started to feel really gross. And I pretty quickly, once I identified that feeling of briefly noticing something wasn't feeling good, and feeling this contradiction of like, what is going on here? Like, I love him. I want to give my all to him. I love giving him my time, but it's not always feeling good to me. And what I recognized was I simply needed some time apart from you. And you seem to not need the time apart from me in that time. But you got it in certain ways, right? And so, like you get up in the morning before I do, and so you automatically have this built-in time apart. And so I recognized that, and then I started to think that there was something wrong with me. Like, oh my gosh, do I not love him? Like, went into all of that. And I think, if I remember right, like this came out kind of sideways one day, where I kind of just like, for me back then, it felt like losing my shit, even though that wasn't like anything.
It was a blow up for Dawn. Like on the Dawn scale, like Dawn scale blow up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which, even especially back then, your emotional expressions were very muted and you kept them tamped down, and so to even express frustration or overwhelm or anything, like what felt big to you would probably look silly to a lot of people, because it was so hard for you to even express it.
Exactly. So I remember bringing that to you and just feeling so lost. And it was really, really hard for me to speak up for that, because I wouldn't ever say no to someone else, really. Mm-hmm. And I felt like I was saying no to you, and it felt like rejecting you at the core of it, even though I knew I wasn't, simply by speaking up for a need and asking for a little bit of time alone.
Mm-hmm. So I believe that a lot of women who consider themselves to be submissive are living in this people-pleasing pattern, where they may be, I believe you were before I asked you to be my submissive, that they may be very genuinely submissive. Mm-hmm. They may enjoy serving. They may get a lot of pleasure for themselves out of giving of themselves. But in my experience of watching you and working with other people, there this people-pleasing pattern plays out with submissive women quite frequently, and to the point that some equate their people-pleasing patterns with their submission. Like, this is what it means to be submissive.
Mm-hmm.
And as you've worked out of those patterns of giving of yourself in a way that is emptying, what's it been like for you to start to learn how to give out of authentic desire instead?
Once I identified the patterns and the emotions that were still connected to them in my body and allowed them to be let go of, the authentic desire is just there. I didn't have to do anything. And so it just started to feel really, really good. Even better. Like, I don't even know if you can compare it, but all I'm going to say is even better than I thought giving felt like before. And I've connected to the depth of true love and gratitude in me that just feels like it's there, and it gets to come out now in true expression in so many ways. And then once I was able to feel that, it's much easier to see any little bit of that people pleasing that's still there in other ways. Like, I also had to look at this in relation to my own 2 daughters, mm-hmm. and parents and friends and all of that, because if it's happening at all, it's maybe happening in all relationships to some degree. But now since I've tapped into what it can be, it's easier to see where it's not in alignment with authenticity.
A big part of this is really learning to own your no.
Absolutely.
Because if you are never willing to say no, and this isn't to say, like, in our relationship, we have limits. We know what our limits are.
Right.
And those things are always respected.
Right.
To the point that you're never put in a position where you really have to say no or use a safe word when it comes to some of the dominant submissive things.
Right.
So it wasn't a skill that really got to be practiced there, where maybe in some people in their dominant submissive explorations, it really is a muscle that they get to practice, or that they can. So you had to learn that in other ways that were more attached to how we relate and how you love.
Right.
But learning to say no when you mean no, what you're getting at with the point you just made a moment ago, was it allowed you to feel your yes to be much stronger.
Yes. Absolutely.
And submission was never meant to be about giving up your boundaries and giving up your no. And there's a lot of conversation and a lot of words that get spent talking about the importance of consent in dominant submissive relationship dynamics. But consent really has to start inside of yourself, and really it goes beyond the bedroom, and it goes beyond the ways that you explore the kink side of BDSM, and into consenting to how how am I going to give of myself? How does it feel good to give? How does it not feel good, and what's a no for me?
Right. And the biggest piece of that journey for me was starting to connect with my body and learning for myself what the words embodiment mean, and like this feminine energy thing, and really tuning into what yes feels like in my body and what no feels like in my body. And at the beginning of so much of my journey was all happening at one time, right? It's not, nothing happens in a vacuum. And so one way of one important aspect of connecting with my body was being honest with myself about what I'm feeling. And so that sent me deeper into this connection to my body that is now possible and can truly be authentic. And like a lot of the ways that started to feel like resentment to me, like I also still genuinely give. Like nothing that I was doing in our relationship is actually like off the table. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Like it only was being shown to me because of this block, if you will. But now I get to actually feel good about the giving, the saying yes. And I'm actually able to release my own projection that someone else is giving to me out of people pleasing, out of an obligation. That's also been a huge piece of my journey, is recognizing the ways that I assumed you were just giving to me out of obligation.
You say a little more about that?
Because of the way I showed up in the world, in all of my relationships, I started to think that, oh, well, they're just giving to me because they think I want it. Or they're just trying to make me happy. And I got really hypersensitive to, like, basically I would elaborate in a much more wordy way of like, don't give to me out of people pleasing, please, don't do that.
To the point that you would reject others wanting to give to you.
Yep.
And push it away, and push it away so that you didn't have to receive something in a way that that you felt like could have been them abandoning themselves in doing so.
Yeah. And just listening to you say that out loud, it's like I just kind of lost the thread that was coming to me. But yeah, I stayed a little too focused in that. But that, all of these things, I've learned how the giving and the receiving, there's some of that in everything, in the expression and the receiving. And so when I was so focused on how I've been doing it, and then I had to look at the ways where I was rejecting, I had the walls built. Mm-hmm. That was also a big part of my journey.
Getting over a people-pleasing approach to life really does mean starting to look out for yourself more. Mm-hmm. And in some people's view of submission, they want to just give. Mm-hmm. And so being able to set some boundaries around what feels good to give and what doesn't feel good to give, if you view submission in that way, is going to seem like you're being a, quote, bad submissive, or you're not being totally submissive, or, whatever words someone might put to that. But it's very important to be able to have strong boundaries, because I heard someone say this, and someone can leave in the comments if you know who this quote is by. I don't remember right now. But the quote was that the most loving people have the strongest boundaries. They can be the most loving because they feel so filled up. They don't have things constantly taking them down internally, because they've been willing to stand up and speak up for themselves. And by protecting their inner space, it allows them to be more loving. And that really is what you have experienced in your version of this, that I've watched you experience through me, of course, but also in all of those other relationships in your life, where owning your no, setting some boundaries, protecting your own energy, you give more of yourself now than you ever have. And you continue, like, that continues to grow.
Right. And I like the quote that you shared, because, going back to what I said before, is what was partly underneath my people pleasing was trying to get love. Mm-hmm. And it's because I was so disconnected from myself that I didn't even love myself. And, that's an important aspect in this thing we call life, is being able to feel your own love. And that's been the other, for lack of a better way to say it, aspect of this journey all this time too, because if I'm trying to get love, I actually don't know how to give love authentically. If I don't actually love myself, like, I thought I loved you, and I did to some degree, but the depths of it can be touched through authenticity. And this is an evolving journey. This isn't like a there and done. I truly believe that the depth of what we get to experience with this word love is really can get as big as we want it to be in life.
Dominance can also people please.
Yes.
And I certainly had my own versions of this in our relationship. And one of the ways that this played out for me, I'm sure it does for other people as well, is I guess it's a really similar thing. It was like, as I was trying to lead this relationship forward, there were certainly times where my leadership, my dominance, kind of fell into trying to figure out what you wanted and giving it to you.
Yeah, which was a pattern that you had gotten earlier in life.
Which is, at its core, at its root, it is a desire to give. It's a desire to give love, but it's also underneath that pattern, in a man who is trying to step forward and take charge, underneath that pattern is trying to get something. Mm-hmm. It's not just, what do you want? Give that to you. Inside here is the covert contract. If anyone hasn't listened to or read the book No More Mr. Nice Guy by Dr. Robert Glover, pick it up and read it. That's the covert contract concept. Will blow your mind how often we do that. But a covert contract in this case is like, I'm wanting you to do something, give something back to me in exchange for me just finding out what you want and giving it to you. And in some ways that can mask very well as leadership.
Mm-hmm.
It can mask even as loving dominance. But in reality, if it's attached to an unspoken desire, then it's not just leading, it's manipulative.
Right. And like in everything I hear you speaking there, it feels like the same thing I've already said. Like you're trying to give someone what they want in order to fill that void in you. And at the root of it is just this, the void that we, in my opinion, naturally have as a human in this world. And we all seek, we have a need to be loved.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get to make sense and a felt sense and start to understand the depths of what is love. Because if you in your mind and your body earlier on in life you have giving equals love, then that is going to perpetuate so many different behaviors and responses in your life.
Mm-hmm. And one of the most uncomfortable things for both of us over time has really been speaking up and saying, this is how I need you to love me.
Mm-hmm. This feels like love to me,
mm-hmm.
right? And
these are my needs.
Yeah. And without thinking about this too long, I'm guessing that some of those things have slightly shifted over time as we've started to understand all of these things about ourselves, mm-hmm. all while being in relationship together. So we were showing up differently before. Now you start personal development, and then I'm starting this personal development of what I call the journey to authenticity. And how all of, like, wow, the amount of conversations and communication that we've had to really have, dropping any sort of like swords that want to come out in any sort of like fighting, just and be real.
Mm-hmm.
With real, like, authentic conversations, and be willing to receive the other in their authentic selves too.
And in their vulnerability.
Yes, that's the better word that I was going for.
Because, let's face it, it's a vulnerable position to put yourself in, to lay yourself out there and say, I need this. Mm-hmm. And I can't get it from you. I can't make you give this to me. And if you do it out of obligation or out of people pleasing, it's not going to feel good because it's not going to be real. So expressing a true need without expectation of having it filled is a very vulnerable position you put yourself in.
Right. So I'm curious how your experience of me was different when there was people pleasing and what it feels like now.
When you know something is off, but you just can't quite put your finger on it. But it's just not right. Like, it's not, like, it's light in the room. The lights are on. But it seems dim. But I can't quite put my finger on why. Is maybe a decent metaphor for how it was before. Because you would do things for me, like you would give to me, and this would play out in the bedroom, it would play out in like anywhere and everywhere, You would do things for me, you would give things to me, you would even say that you wanted to, that you liked it, that you wanted to do more of it. But it just felt off. Like,
I have a great example.
What's that?
For what has shifted in me is the act of kneeling. That happened at the beginning of our relationship daily because, like, you shared what this meant to you.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it was in honoring you, it was respect, it was love, it was devotion. I don't remember exactly how you described that before, but that's what I somewhat remember. And so I would kneel for you. What I feel in kneeling for you now, and many different ways, is a true respect, a deeper love, a deeper devotion. And again, I wanted to give you respect. I wanted to give you admiration. I wanted to give all those things to you before, and so I would kneel. But I know that you feel me differently now in that. And so, like, I think that is one of the most profound differences for me. And I just didn't know what I didn't know before.
So, you know, in retrospect, now what I can see is that before you were performing. Like,
and I hate even like saying that, but it was, like, to some degree.
Because I would say, I want something. You would want to give it to me, and so you would do it. But you would do it because I wanted it, not because you wanted to do it.
I wanted to please you, and I wanted to show you the things you wanted to feel.
Mm-hmm. But you can never do that by just performing.
No.
Like, it will never feel like the way I want it to feel unless you are doing it because you want to.
And when I say I want to, it's like what, again, through connecting with my body, has opened these felt desires and felt experiences that just couldn't be experienced before.
Well, before, using the kneeling thing as an example, you wanted to kneel for me because I wanted you to.
Yes.
Now you want to do it because it feels good to you to display yourself to me in that way.
And now it still feels like I can't even, like, display it enough.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that, like, that desire to give yourself, that's coming out of you instead of coming out of people pleasing, instead of coming out of performance, is the difference in how I receive it. Because you know, I'm feeling you feeling that desire to give.
Mm-hmm.
And that's back to the light analogy. Like, the dim light was, you're doing the thing. Like, the action is the same. It's just the energy that you feel in doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where expressing desire can be so vulnerable. Expressing a need can be so vulnerable, because I can say, this is really important to me. And I can speak up for my own need. And I can tell you exactly what it is that I need. If you take that and then just do the actions, it's not going to meet the need.
Yeah, I think that's a whole nother rabbit hole we can go down.
Yeah. But one other place that plays out in a lot of people's relationships in Dom-Sub dynamics is where one partner really wants this, like, let's say the submissive really wants this dom-sub dynamic, and she goes to her vanilla partner, or maybe to a new person she's dating who doesn't know much or anything about dominance and submission, and says, I want this kind of relationship. This is how I want my relationship to look, and I want to be submissive to my partner. If that dominant partner wants to do that for her, maybe because he loves her, or because he's really fond of her and wants to see this relationship work. If he's doing it just because she wants him to, that's the same thing. It's just going to feel to her like he's performing.
Right.
Because what she really wants is for him to want it for himself.
Right.
And so you can take that all the way down to the smallest little tasks and rules in a dominant submissive dynamic, all the way up to the level of the existence of the dynamic itself.
Exactly.
So one thought that I want to end on here is something from Ayn Rand's book Atlas Shrugged, is where this concept comes from. And this thought is that someone else's need does not create an obligation on my part.
You shared that with me. I don't remember when, but wow, is that... Yes, that was eye-opening for me.
And that will strike right at the core of people pleasing. If anyone listening to this, like, ask yourself that question: where am I making someone else's need into an obligation for me? And the reason it strikes right at the core of people pleasing is that if that dynamic is true, if the dynamic of someone else's need means that I must meet that need, if we expand that out just a little ways, and everyone is looking around looking for, what does anyone else need? Where is their need present in my relationship, in my family? Like, and that might even be going far enough to completely spend a person's entire life.
Right.
But if you go out to the community, you start going any wider, you see how fast this devolves.
Yep.
Because everyone is giving away into this bottomless pit of need, because need can be expanded so easily in a way that becomes manipulative. And this is where I believe a lot of submissive women end up in relationships with takers, because their submission gets seen as a willingness to always meet any need that gets expressed. And so need becomes a bottomless hole, a black hole of absorbing the giving of anyone who's willing to step forward and meet that need. But the amount that there is to give is always finite. It's limited by time, it's limited by energy. And if someone gives themselves away to any place that they see need present, then they can only hope that what they need is going to get filled by someone else. Which means that the only way for that person to not completely collapse in exhaustion and be out of money, out of energy, out of time, and completely used up is if somebody else sees their need and gives to them. And the truth is that every single person operates out of self-interest to some extent. We have to. We absolutely must operate out of self-interest, or we would never take a sip of water until we knew that every other person on the planet had some water.
Right. It's just that self-interest is pretty unconscious.
Mm-hmm. And the alternative to giving away all of yourself to any expressed need is to take some ownership of your self-interest, even as a submissive.
Yes.
To take some ownership of your self-interest and recognize that if you give yourself away always, all the time, you're just empty. And that's why you may feel tired and exhausted and burned out at the end of your rope.
That was something you pointed out in our discussions before I said yes to becoming your submissive, is some of the ways that you see that play out in me. And I was like, whoa, wow. There was no denying it, and how I gave of myself to anyone and everything and really didn't get in return outside of you.
So when you take care of yourself first and you let yourself be filled up by yourself first, and you allow yourself to receive from others who genuinely want to give to you, then this is the analogy I use of a bathtub, where if water is flowing into a bathtub and you leave the drain open, all of the water that runs in is going to run right back out. And so anything you receive is just going to be gone, because you are out there looking for anyone who needs any energy you have and giving it away, taking care of other people, giving your time to other people, giving your money to other people, just giving.
Mm-hmm.
And if you close the drain on the bathtub and you let some water pour into you and fill yourself up, eventually you will be full. And if that water keeps pouring into you and you continue to allow yourself to receive when you're full, which is hard, because, oh, now I have enough. I feel really good. Like, I'm full. I am complete. I'm whole. I've taken care of myself by closing that drain, stopping for a little while, slowing down and letting myself be filled up. I've become abundant. And some people get very uncomfortable with being abundant when they're used to being in lack, in the giving away of themselves. But if you close that drain and fill yourself up, and you allow yourself to continue to receive when you are in that state of brimming with abundance and love and resources and energy, guess what?
The water's going to overflow on the floor.
It's gonna make a complete mess. It's gonna go everywhere, because you're gonna have so much in you that you can give of yourself from a place of fullness instead of a place of emptiness. So,
and the overflowing becomes beautiful and feels different and good. And for me, it feels like being alive.
Well, you are alive because now you're full of energy instead of empty of energy.
Exactly.
And you can still give the same amount. So, people pleasing is not submission.
No.
And people pleasing is not dominance.
No.
It's also not healthy relating for any person in or out of a dom-sub dynamic.
Right.
It is okay to be a little bit selfish and put yourself first and to take care of you. And it's necessary so that you can be in authentic giving of yourself.
This was, throughout this process was where you told me, like, I want you to be selfish. And I had to sit with, like, why does that word feel so ill to me? And it's just the connotation that I had with it. When I grew up hearing don't be selfish, and you're telling me, like, be selfish. I'm like, what is that? But when you think about it in the terms of the bathtub analogy and actually like giving to yourself first, it makes sense, because you truly can't give of yourself if you don't have a self to give.
So this is a really great conversation. I appreciate all of your insight and your growth in this, and how much it's given back to our relationship and allowed me to experience a totally new version of you.
It feels good. Thank you. Thank you for leading me through it.
I'm very glad that you're mine.
Me too, sir.